And welcome to another episode of Immigration and Mobility Decoded, a podcast about business immigration and global mobility. We have a great episode ahead. Finn, how are you doing on this Monday morning?
Doing well, fighting off the spring allergies. I think there's more pollen than oxygen in the air right now, but that's
Oh,
all right.
man.
We'll battle through it to summer.
Yeah. Yes, I feel like this is week two of your allergy battle.
That's how it goes. How is it in Chicago? Do you guys got a lot of pollen there, or because there's no
um,
trees, just high rises, you can get away with it?
Depending on where you live, there's actually a pretty good amount of trees. I don't have allergies, so I guess I'll have to ask the wife on how her allergies are doing because I'm not quite sure.
You have a superior immune system, I guess, huh?
Yeah, there we go. There we go. How was your Mother's Day weekend? We are recording this May 15th, so the weekend following or the day after Mother's Day.
Mother's Day was great. A lot of time in the garden, a lot of time cooking breakfast and dinner for mom and the family. So it was great. How about yours?
Same, same. Celebrated with both sides of the family. A lot of good food was eaten. Steakhouse. There's a local restaurant, fried chicken place in Chicago that we visited
Ooh,
yesterday. So can't go wrong with both of those.
nice.
But yeah, shout out to all the mothers out there, and appreciate everything you do. So Finn, hopping into immigration, this the conversation we have coming up is with Sophy King. She is the president of global immigration here at Envoy Global. She is based in the UK. We spoke to her a couple days ago just to learn more about global immigration, the mobility industry as a whole. Anything noteworthy that stood out to you in that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, the conversation's great. Similar to all of our guests, Sophie just has a really interesting background. She didn't follow sort of the traditional track of somebody in the immigration and mobility world. She's not a lawyer.
Mhm.
She's been an entrepreneur and run her own immigration service companies in the past, and she came aboard at Envoy a few years ago and has really overseen quite the expansion of Envoy's global services and has her finger on the pulse of really everything that's going on in the global immigration space. So we get the chance to talk with her about kind of what the future of global mobility and immigration looks like, which I found really interesting, and I hope the audience will too.
Definitely, definitely agree. So that conversation will be coming up soon. But if before we get there, just a brief reminder that if you're watching on YouTube, definitely like this video and subscribe to the Envoy Global YouTube channel so you can watch prior podcast episodes as well as future content coming out. If you are listening on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, definitely would appreciate a follow. So Finn, just quickly hopping into some immigration news updates. The June visa bulletin recently came out. What happened with the June visa bulletin?
Yeah, it came out late last week, and essentially what happened is not a whole lot, but that isn't great news for most folks who are stuck in the green card backlog because most of the categories that have the biggest backlog have retrogressed so much in the last 6 months
Mm,
that obviously everyone's hoping for forward movement at least a little bit each time a new visa bulletin comes out. But this month for the major employment based categories was pretty stagnant, so that is unfortunate for a lot of folks, but we hope that the State Department and USCIS and the government starts to work through that backlog a little bit more this year.
definitely. And speaking of backlogs, there was a piece in Axios late last week where they highlighted the staffing shortages going on in the nursing and assisted living facility sphere slash industries. As I'm sure a lot of us know, a lot of registered nurses in the U.S. are of immigrant heritage. In fact, I think it's 1 in 6 registered nurses are immigrant. And a lot of these practices, facilities, companies are finding themselves in a tight spot, according to Axios, in that they've hired a workforce, but they're unable to come to the US because of the backlog in the visa interview process. Approximately 370,000 applicants have a scheduled interview pending. So that piece is on Axios. Definitely recommend checking that out. And Finn, elsewhere, I think a lot of us, probably in the last 2 weeks or so, saw this across, all the major news outlets and publications. But Title 42 did end on May 11th. That expired as a result of the national COVID health emergency also expiring. Um, we won't get too much into Title 42, but have you come across any resources that you might recommend for listeners to check out if they want to learn more about, what it means moving forward?
Yeah, I always recommend the National Immigration Forum's research. I mean, like you said, Title 42 really has been dominating not just the immigration news landscape for the past couple of weeks, but the mainstream news landscape for the past couple of weeks as well. But one factor of that, one result of that might be that Congress seems to be looking at immigration a little bit more seriously again. Our friend Arturo over at the National Immigration Forum, who we had on the podcast a few weeks ago, he put out the National Immigration Forum's legislative bulletin today, sort of recapping all of the existing bills in Congress that relate to immigration. So there's a bit more chatter around immigration reform right now. And obviously, Congress plays a huge role in creating and making and reforming immigration policy. I know, Eric, you've been following one particular bill that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So, to your point about Congress, maybe looking to move forward on some immigration legislation. Also, late last week, the House of Representatives passed an immigration bill focused on the border. The vote was 219 to 213. And in that bill, it was mainly focused on border security, that, according to the New York Times, would crack down on unlawful immigration. Additionally, the Times says the bill would codify a number of policies that the Trump administration had enacted during the time in office. Additionally, the bill would mandate companies verify their employees are legally eligible to work in the U.S. through the e-verify system. The New York Times and other outlets have additional write ups and dive deeper into the context of that bill. But most observers say that the bill does not have a chance to advance in the Senate. And if it did, I believe President Biden has already said he would veto that bill. So as we look to wrap things up for this episode's intro, Finn, anything else top of mind?
Yeah, final thing I'll add. Envoy is conducting a pulse survey this month of global mobility specialists, immigration managers, anyone in the global mobility world who's currently working at a company that has employees in Canada or requires business travel to Canada. And essentially, just a short 2-minute survey where Envoy is asking folks, how they feel about current trends in Canadian immigration policy, and the plan is to release those results at the end of the month. So we'll add that survey link in the description. And if you qualify, please share your feedback and your input. Again, it's just a quick 2-minute survey, and the results will be shared at the end of the month.
Awesome. Looking forward to those results. And now I'd like to welcome Sophy King, President of Global Immigration at Envoy Global, to the show. Sophie, thank you so much for joining us. This is technically part two. The last time we had you on, we ran into some technical difficulties, so we just decided to re-record and have a smooth session. Hopefully, no internet outages this time around.
Yeah. Talk to Richard Branson.
Yeah, there you go. Sophie, how are things going? I know you have a big update for us. We'll get to it in a second, but overall, how are things going on your neck of the woods?
Pretty good. Yeah, it's a nice sunny day, which always puts all British people in a good mood because it's not that common. Just come back from Dublin last week where we had a big event. That was really fun. And yeah,
Mhm.
things are looking pretty good from where I'm sitting.
Awesome. So we'll get to that event in Dublin in just a second. But Sophie, I just wanted to kind of start with your career background and just learn a little bit more about how you got started in global immigration.
Well, I studied. So yeah, what do I? My mother wanted me to be a lawyer. My grandfather was a lawyer. I did not want to do what my mum asked me to do, so I refused to be a lawyer, which is quite funny since now I spend all day, every day, working with lawyers. And most people think I am a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer though. I did languages, so I studied Chinese at university, and then I went and lived in Japan for a little while and learned Japanese. And when I got back to the UK, I wanted some type of job in some type of international field. And an advert came up for an immigration consultant position. So I answered it. I didn't even really understand what it was. And I loved the idea of it as soon as I was at the interview. So I took the job and have never looked back, really, you know. Yeah. And I've always done global. I've never specialized in one country. So
Hmm.
the job was always any country to any other country. And
Hmm.
I always loved like getting up in the morning, calling, you know, from my time zone, we call Asia Pacific first thing in the morning. So I would call Japan and China and Australia and chat to them all morning. And then I'd have the middle of the day for, you know, kind of Europeans or maybe lunch break. And then in the afternoon, I'd be talking to the Americans and the Brazilians and the Canadians. And I loved it. And I
Yeah,
still love it. Yeah.
that's such an awesome career path. Do you what are some people's reactions when they find out you're not actually a lawyer?
Yeah, they can't believe it, you know. And sometimes, in fact, I was having lunch with somebody the other day who was a lovely guy and a very well-renowned lawyer. And he said, lawyers like us. And I said, actually, I'm not. And he looked a bit horrified. He was a bit like, oh, I was like, yeah, you've been having lunch. So it's not. But yeah, I mean, you know, I feel like Erin Brockovich, you know, she says, I just work with them. So yeah, I have the highest and deepest respect for lawyers. Most of my best friends are lawyers, but I don't mind not being one because I feel like if you're a lawyer, you specialize very deeply in one area, which I really respect.
Hmm.
But I have always been more of a, you know, uh, broad but maybe shallow. You know, I like to learn about everything, a little bit
Right,
about everything.
right.
So yeah,
So you are a lot of our guests have lived in other or lived around the world. So
yeah.
of the countries you've lived in, any of them, do you have any experiences that stand out more than others?
Well, I don't know because of the countries that I've lived in it at such different stages of my life. So when I was 18, I went to Russia for 6 months, spent 6 months in Moscow, which was amazing. I was a teacher, even though I was only like 1 or 2 years older than my students. In fact, once one of the other teachers came into our classroom and told us all off because she thought I was just one of the students as well. And I just didn't say anything because I didn't want to admit that I was supposed to be the teacher. So that was, you know, that was a kind of coming of age experience. You know, I went on the train to Vladivostok, you know, and back again and had some amazing times. And then when I was studying Chinese, obviously I went to live in China for a little while. And that was amazing to learn Chinese, speak to Chinese people for the first time, you know, again, living in a student hostel. Then I spent a few years in Japan, where I was finally earning some money. I was teaching English, obviously, just straight post university. And then I lived in Spain for a while, and that was a completely different experience because I was already working by then, and we moved our global team for the company I was working for at the time. We moved it from London to Madrid just because we were growing so fast. So we left our UK-based team, you know, the UK immigration experts in London, and then we moved the global team to Madrid. So I had to move my team, and I had to hire in Madrid. So that was an utterly different experience. But all of them were wonderful, and experiences that I would certainly not ever want to have missed out on. And I'm a bit sad that my kind of traveling around the world days are temporarily, you know, I've got children, so you can't really
Yeah.
do that so easily. I mean, I'm in awe of our clients who are moving their families all the time. I
Hmm.
can't even imagine how difficult that is. But
Right.
yeah, I'm postponed for a little while at least.
A lot of different experiences. Love to hear it. No, thank you so much for sharing. So Sophie, at the top you mentioned Immigration Day, which you recently organized and held in Dublin the last week of April. Was it?
Yeah, yeah, 25th.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, can you just talk a little bit more about that event, the audience, and some of noteworthy items that came out of it?
So it was an amazing event, and I nominally organised it, but it was a whole team of people who organised it, both within Envoy and outside Envoy. So it was a massively collaborative experience. And we did it the day before the Euro conference. So the Euro conference is the European Relocation Association, although now there are members from all over the world. And I've been going to their conferences for years and years and years. And I've always organised the immigration day that has historically been on the Tuesday for several years. This year they couldn't do it. Euro couldn't do it because they wanted to concentrate quite fairly and reasonably on sustainability, which is clearly an issue facing our industry. So I said to them, look, why don't we just do it as an Envoy day and not as part of Euro, which they were very happy with and I was very happy with. So that's what happened. So Euro starts on the Wednesday and we had our day's events on the Tuesday, and it was amazing. So we had 2 government ministers come to speak to us. So Minister Neil Richmond opened the day, and then Minister Simon Coveney, who's the deputy leader of Fine Gael, which is the party in charge in Ireland at the moment. He came as our keynote speaker at the end of the day. We had a number of amazing panels. So we had a panel on Ireland and how Ireland's kind of open and welcoming attitude and like deep understanding of immigration as an economic lever has been so successful in bringing companies to Ireland and really supporting the economy and all of that kind of stuff. And that was moderated by Billy, who's an old friend of mine, and included our very own Aaron Flynn, so our director of Ireland, who is an absolutely lovely person. And we also had David Hennihan, who works at Adelshaw Goddard, which is a great law firm in Dublin. And we had Andrew Fogelar, who works for the IDA, which is the investment authority in Ireland, which partners really successfully with companies to help, develop in Ireland. And then we had a international panel moderated by Priyam from India. And we had Ken from Canada, Joanna from Sweden, Kunle from Nigeria, and Faisal from Saudi. So they were talking about kind of, how things ebb and flow a little bit. So Sweden historically has been seen as being quite open, now is very much like closing its door. They have quite a right-wing party in charge. It's a little bit more immigration. It's a bit of a hot potato, Nigeria, like what happens there, like oil and gas, post oil and gas. And then Saudi is super interesting because obviously they have a big drive to encourage foreign direct investment. So Saudi's granting government contracts only to companies that have their regional HQs in Saudi. So they're trying to encourage people to move from Dubai to Saudi, that type of stuff going on there. So that was and on that panel we had Emma Richmond as well, talking about Ireland, because we really wanted to represent Ireland throughout the whole day, since that's where we were. And then in the afternoon, we had this kind of collaborative workshop. So we got into groups, and Maria from Greece and Georgie from Barcelona, who were 2 amazing immigration experts and obviously good friends, they organized this kind of event where in the tables, people were inventing their own immigration program. Like if you were an advisor to a government, what would you suggest they do to bring in key talent and skilled workers? So we had people coming up with all sorts of crazy ideas, and then we were allowed to vote for the country's program that we thought was the best, and there were prizes, and then we had a drinks party. So yeah, it was an amazing day and we loved it. Yeah.
Drinks never hurt, especially at a party.
No.
One more question, and then I'll turn it over to Finn. I guess, Sophie, some of those ideas that you guys voted on, any that stood out the most that you'd like to share?
So there was a lot about, there was the things that you would expect, right? Spousal work permission being important, short processing times, being document intensive, that type of stuff, benefits like permanent residency, access to citizenship. And then we had some slightly more crazy and out there ideas like no tax, the skilled talent who comes to our country won't have to pay any tax at all for a long time. Or on our table, there was this idea, if the government or if the company invests, I can't even remember what we said, we were getting a little bit overexcited. If the company invests, $10 million or currency or whatever into this scheme of ours, then they would be assigned or given access to a pool of skilled labour that we would source from skilled refugees who are available and able and would like to contribute their skills and their talents and their energy to the workforce. I think many of these things are not really workable in practice. And there was a lot of kind of laughter in this session, because we were thinking about kind of, I guess, ideals and, what could you do if you could do anything? But then you get a little bit drawn back to earth and you think, well, if we wouldn't have any tax at all, maybe our country would be on a short road to bankruptcy, So, yeah. But, and one of the rules actually in this session was that the incentives and the ideas we should be discussing should have precedent somewhere else. So obviously this $10 million refugee doesn't really have precedent, although the work that Talent Beyond Boundaries does is akin to that sort of thing. You know, they have a book of, I mean, the work that Marina Brizard does with that organization is absolutely amazing. So she has a book of like skilled and talented refugees, and she works with governments to try and open up legal routes into the labour market for these people. But yeah, we were supposed to defend our, and you know, there are routes where there's no tax to be paid, obviously in countries where that doesn't happen. And obviously there are routes where there's spousal work permission or access for dependents, non-traditional dependents, you know, so for maybe second level cousins and grandparents and aunts and uncles and that type of thing. So, and it was quite inspirational how much knowledge everybody in the room has, you know, when they come together, because people would say, I didn't this really exist, and someone else would say, no, I've seen that in Saudi, or I've seen that program in Dominican Republic or whatever. So that's always fun as well. Yeah.
Well, Sophie, with this collaboration of ideas and folks fresh on your mind, I wanted to ask you kind of the 10,000 foot view of global mobility in 2023. I mean, believe it or not, we're almost halfway through the year, right? It's May right now. We're almost to June, at the halfway point of 2023. Yeah. I know. And there are several countries this year that have opened up new immigration pathways to attract skilled talent. From your perspective, what countries are you keeping an eye on where you think those countries will continue to open up new pathways to try to attract employers and attract foreign talent? And what countries do you think employers are looking at in the next 6 months to maybe shift their talent to?
So I don't know. I mean, the usual suspects jump out, right? So Canada, Ireland. I mean, I've obviously just been in Ireland and we've literally just been talking about all of this. So maybe that's why it's kind of top of mind for me. But countries, so one of the comments one of our ministers made last week, he said, we consider it a privilege when companies want to come here. We are privileged and grateful to companies that want to set up their headquarters here. And he said, and I think some other countries maybe see it as more of a burden to have to deal with the kind of administration. So really, I think sometimes it's a question of the new versus the old. You know, some of our, and I don't want to name like in a negative way, but some of our older countries with kind of older and bigger economies maybe aren't quite as appreciative of foreign investment and immigration talent as newer countries. So I think that's what we should be looking at is you know, places like Ireland, Canada, Saudi, like these places that we've talked about, which are thinking actually we need, have understood we need that workforce and we need that talent. The EU is interesting because the EU very clearly needs talent. The EU population is aging dramatically, obviously, and clearly needs immigration to come in and stimulate the economy and look after. And I think that's very widely acknowledged within the EU, but because of the nature of the EU, it's difficult to, you know, the new revised blue card scheme is a very clear attempt, as was the old blue card scheme, right? It's a very clear attempt to try and draw in that type of talent, but it always runs into a few hurdles because it has to be, you know, one size fits so many, and that's quite tricky.
Speaking of the EU, a hot topic in 2022, and I'm sure it will be going forward in the coming years, is remote work visas. And most recently, Spain introduced one. I know Italy's considering one. Germany has one. There's several countries in the Middle East and the Caribbean that have them. How do you view the role of remote work visas and digital nomadism as a broader trend in the corporate immigration space going forward?
So this is really interesting because there are multiple different types of remote work / digital nomad visas, right? So there's the Caribbean ones, which were an early response to COVID, meaning that nobody could come as tourists to their countries. So they thought, well, what on earth can we do? Everybody's working from home with their laptop. Why don't they work here? It's obviously nicer than that, you know, cold little spare room in London or wherever. And that was one response to that very specific scenario, which I think was reasonably successful and has stuck. Then you have these digital nomad so-called visas in places like Spain, Greece, Estonia's got quite a good one. Germany has a sort of freelancer visa, which they had anyway, but which people have been sort of rebranding as a digital nomad visa. It's a bit more complicated. And I think the issue or the wrinkles that will have to be ironed out are because the term digital nomad is this makes me sound like an old woman, but I am one. So I'm just going to say it anyway. The term digital nomad is made up. It doesn't really mean anything. So it's not really a thing. There's not an actual, it's not a thing. So you can't say, oh yeah, digital nomads can apply for this visa, because people haven't agreed, and each country is defining the concept of digital nomad for themselves. So, typically speaking, we're talking about somebody who's on a contract somewhere else, who's not working directly with clients in that country, who is paid enough to support themselves, and who is essentially kind of floating on the surface of the society. They're not kind of integrating themselves into the labor market. But some of these schemes allow I think the Spanish scheme does allow some work with clients in Spain. So it becomes like a little bit more of a grey area. And I think the success or otherwise of them depends on probably two or three things. So one, how much they fill a gap. So the UAE version of the digital nomad visa is excellent and very successful and very popular, partly because really good mechanism. Well, I didn't think there was a very good mechanism in the UAE for temporary and non-local employees. So if you wanted to send someone on like a 6-month or a 9-month assignment, it was quite tricky to do that in a compliant way. And the digital nomad visa has made that possible in the UAE. So it fills a gap, and that's a good thing. And so where that happens, then I think they will be successful. But then the other side of it is how well such schemes are set up with regard to tax and social security and employment and all of that type of stuff as well, because all of that is huge and you can't really disentangle it. So the Spanish one, I think, there's a lot of consideration being given to those aspects. Maybe some of the other programs not so much. Actually, we were laughing about it last week because Maria and Geordie, who I mentioned from Greece and Spain, Maria was saying, well, Greece had its first, and Geordie was saying, well, the Spanish one's better, and we thought about it more. So, so there's a little bit swings and roundabouts, right? I think it's really interesting, though. We'll see where we get to with it. And I think if I can carry on like banging on about it, I think the other thing that's really interesting about it is the definition of what work is, because for a long time, immigration policies have been designed around this concept of work. And work, when people think about work, it's like, what is it? So my work, such as it is, basically involves talking to people and writing some emails, And so if I go to another country, I carry on talking to people and writing emails. I don't pick up spanners and start fixing machines or going into hospitals and performing tests on people. The work that I do and that you do, that most of us do, is pretty difficult to define. The difference between that and a business visa is quite difficult to find. So I think it will therefore, and more that is the case. And it seems to me, and I think seems to many of us, right, that if you're going to have work that is a bit more like business, but which clearly is still work, you're going to have slightly more flexible and slightly more agile immigration systems which can accommodate and allow for that type of work becoming compliant. Because you should not go and work on a business visa, but if your work is a thing that you can do easily in a 2 or 3 or 4 or couple of weeks trip to somewhere, then really you should be applying for a thing which can then be issued to you under those circumstances. I don't know if this makes sense, but hopefully you get what I'm saying.
Total sense, and it's honestly a perfect segue into the question I wanted to ask you next, because you already alluded to it, but there are traditional visas like in the US we have the H-1B, right? And that's a visa for a specific class of worker, right, to do a specific sort of high skilled task. But more and more, these remote work visas that countries are introducing, like you said, operate a bit more in the gray area and have more flexibility around the definitions for what is considered work under the requirements to obtain that visa. And then somewhere in the middle, you have like the UK high potential individual visa, right? That is for a specific group of, highly educated foreign professionals, right? But they aren't tied to an employer, so they can sort of get the visa, come to the UK and find their own path from there. What do you think will be the predominant strategy for countries as they're developing new immigration pathways going forward? Will it be a mix of those three, sort of a smorgasbord of all available options, or will the more flexible or the more stringent pathways beat each other out?
I don't know. I can't see a very clear way to get past having to tie work permits to specific types of work. Because if you don't do that, for the majority, that UK visa that you mentioned is for a very tiny group of people. I mean, it's not going to really make any dent or any impact in the labour market. But if you're not careful with how you issue work permits, and if you're not cautious about which roles you issue them in, then you can have a problem with your labour market. And if you start having problems with your labour market, then people start getting unhappy with you about immigration. And once people get unhappy with you, then you have to have very openly restrictive policies, and it's very hard for you to row back on them, even if what your economy actually needs is to be a little, then the politicians can't even go there. So, if I were giving advice to my fictional country, as we were doing last week in Dublin, I'd say be a little bit careful with how open and generous you are, just so that you don't dig a hole for yourself to fall into, because you have to tread that line so carefully, And this is what our Irish ministers were saying as well. They were like, we recognise that there's a housing problem in Ireland. There really isn't enough housing. So they were saying, we recognise this, and we recognise that having, a lot of people coming in is putting strain on some of our infrastructure. But we also understand that it's good for our economy, but we have to tread the line carefully, because it doesn't take much for it to just flip the wrong way around. So, yeah. I think what would be useful, though, and I think some countries, I hope we see more of this, is a bit more flexibility for changing of status or changing of employer. So if you have somebody on a work permit and they either lose their job or they want to move to a new job, you don't want that talent, really, typically, if they're on a highly skilled work visa. You don't want that talent to have to leave and then find an employer and then come back. So in a lot of countries, there is flexibility to have, a month or 2 months, but I feel like there should be a little bit longer in most places to have that flexibility and that leeway to find a new employer and then switch status without having to go all the way home again.
Sophie,
I'd like to see more of. Yeah.
Switching to you mentioned at the Immigration Day, one of the topics that was discussed was sustainability. Can you dive into that a little bit more and maybe explain and talk more about the audience about sustainability and why it's a growing concern, issue, etc.?
Well, actually, sustainability was not discussed. Sustainability was the Euro conference put on a day of sustainability events. So in fact, not only did we not discuss sustainability, but we had a competing, not really competing, but our Immigration Day was on the same day as their Sustainability Day. But I totally supported their desire to talk about sustainability. It's really important for the relocation industry specifically, because a lot of our colleagues and peers at this conference are people who are doing like traditional relocation services, where they're, moving trucks and people's possessions, and they're flying. So, there's question marks over, is it better to buy new stuff or is it better to ship your old stuff? And what all of that like carbon footprint and all of that. So it doesn't apply maybe to the immigration industry quite so much, because we're giving, we're essentially in the advice business rather than the kind of tangible object business. But I fully supported their need and desire to talk about it, although I wanted to talk about immigration a bit more. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel like I started hearing more about sustainability and relo and global mobility as early last year. So yeah.
And there's a few initiatives, right? So there's the work that Euro is doing. There's my friend Paul Barnes is a independent consultant who cares very deeply about sustainability and global mobility, and he's giving advice to clients on how to think about these policies when you're drafting your relocation policy and all of that type of stuff, because there's a lot to unpack, I think, and it's quite difficult for companies. You're trying to think about compliance and risk and how to be attractive to your employees and how to make sure, but then how do you do all of that while also being, green and eco-positive and with all of these things, I don't know. I mean, I'm no expert at all, but I always feel like as soon as you feel like you're doing the right thing, then you discover that actually you've done the wrong thing. You think it's great to recycle everything, and then you find out you shouldn't have recycled it. You should have reused it or never bought it in the first place or whatever.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Some of the rules, even the mundane ones of, like you mentioned, recycling. I'm in Chicago and we have like recycling bins, and I know this does not at all completely relate to global mobility, but it's just like if you throw the wrong thing in there, they just toss out everything else that's in the bin.
Right. Exactly. So what if you do? You put in your like dirty pizza box, and then like, God, I might have polluted the whole of the recycling of the
Yeah.
entire city. And yeah, you've got
Yeah.
to be careful. You've got to get it right. But yeah.
So Sophie, I know we have a couple minutes left. I guess just as we look to wrap things up, Finn, I like it at the start. You mentioned, we're already almost at the halfway point of the year, May coming up on June. Sophie, in your experience, or if you were to put on your hat of words of wisdom, at this time of the year, should companies look at their global mobility programs, their global immigration programs, and reassess anything that they, in your opinion, that they should take stock of as then we move throughout the rest of the year?
So in an ideal world, I think people would be looking at their Q1 and then their Q2 kind of spend and movement. Who's going where, why they're going, how long they're going for, and how much it's costing. And then they would use that information to try and plan to cut costs, but keep the desired kind of actions and mobility and all that kind of stuff for the second half of the year. So it's always useful to, take stock and look back and try and plan for the rest of the year, and to think about what you're going to do next year. I'm a reporting geek. I love reports, and I think it's really important for people to understand. I don't see how you can make any good decisions about anything unless you know what it is that you're doing in the first place. So I think it's very important for companies to have access to, like I say, what they're spending and why they're spending it, in order to make sensible decisions about if they need to continue to do that, or if they're going to need to up the spend, or if there's something where they can reduce it. Look at different types of assignment, different types of program, because there's a lot you can do with immigration that I think not everybody realizes. You don't have to send everybody on long-term work assignments. Sometimes it's better to do short-term rotational assignments, or even kind of remote work. Sometimes it's possible to send people on business trips if you cut out the pieces of their activity which are sort of tipping them over the edge into needing work permits. And why not do that if it's going to be quicker and easier, and save you some time and some money? So I think that's what you want to be doing, is looking at what you did and trying to think about optimizations for the second half of the year. Yeah.
For sure. Well, Sophie, it's been a pleasure having you on. Before we wrap things up, I know you just had Immigration Day 2023. Any other events coming up that you'd like our audience to know about?
Well, I know that we have people going to CERC in September in Canada. I think that. I'm pretty sure that Regina, my colleague in Singapore, might be at the ERC in Singapore, although I haven't actually spoken to her about it yet, but I think she might be there. We'll be around the place. We always love to see everybody and meet everyone. I might go to the IBA in Paris in October. Not sure yet, but yeah. And then we're already thinking about Immigration Day 2024 as well.
You stole my question. I was going to ask if that's if that's been thought of.
We have to, because everyone was like, oh, we had such a great time. So I'm going to send a survey out to all, because, people say to you, oh, it's amazing. And I always think, oh, great. But then you think, well, maybe they're just saying that to me. So we're going to send out an anonymous survey to all the attendees and just check if everybody did actually like it and what they want to talk about next year. But next year is in Portugal. So I'm thinking, this is like a sneak preview, and don't hold me to it, but I'm thinking maybe we could have a tech theme, because Portugal's big into digital nomad and tech investment, and they have a really excellent kind of investment arm of the government as well, which helps companies come and set up. They have special, slightly relaxed criteria for tech visas and that type of stuff. So I'm thinking to have a tech theme of the day, thinking about maybe look at the role of AI in immigration as well. Maybe this time next year we might understand a little bit more about what we're talking about there, so.
Well, Sophie, Eric and I would like to formally offer ourselves as the official podcast for Immigration Day 2024. Immigration and Mobility Decoded would love to be there.
Yes.
Not because we'd like to go to Portugal or anything.
Yeah, that would be amazing. That would be amazing. Well, Sophie, keep us in the loop and posted on Immigration Day 2024 and any other events. Final question: where can listeners find you and potentially ask you questions or just chat?
Oh, well, they can email me, obviously, sophie.king@envoyglobal.com, or I'm on LinkedIn. I spend too much time messing around on LinkedIn. So I'm on there. And phone number is, I think, in my email signature. So email me. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Well, Sophie, we appreciate you hopping on the show today. And thankfully, the internet, Richard Branson's internet, did not go out, so we had a smooth recording.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you on future episodes.
Thanks, man. Lovely to speak. Take care.
Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to Immigration and Mobility Decoded. If you watched this video on YouTube and you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the Envoy Global YouTube channel for more content like this. Otherwise, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, everyone.